Oh, you'll have to excuse me. I've just remembered something I must write down. A beaded necklace. Yes, this was when we were in the Indian country of Kansas. I recall one day when Pa took me and my sister, Mary, to a nearby creek where we discovered something glittering in the grasses. Small, shining beads that had been lost to the ground below when the Indian women worked their craft by the creek. Ivory whites, brilliant blues, golden yellows, and a great many scarlet reds flashed like dancing spirits beside the creek. Mary and I, we knew just what we would do with them. Our sister Carrie would soon be born, and we welcomed her to this world by adorning her with that delicate beaded necklace. Oh, I'm writing a manuscript of memories and stories of my childhood. It's a wonder that I recall the simplest memories in such detail. But as the years pass, I am coming more and more to understand that it is the common, everyday blessings of our common, everyday lives, which we should be particularly grateful. They are the things that fill our lives with comfort and our hearts with gladness. Just the pure air to breathe and the strength to breathe it. Just warmth and shelter and home folks. Just plain food that gives us strength. The bright sunshine on a cold day and a cool breeze when the day is warm. A simple beaded necklace upon a newborn babe. I recall how Pa would play his fiddle and sing songs of a time before my own. On a night when I was feeling particularly philosophical, he sang Auld Lang Syne. I asked him, "What are the days of Auld Lang Syne, Pa?" He told me they were days of a long ago time. It was then that I realized perhaps I too would one day be among those people of long ago. A strange feeling for a child. But then another thought greeted my mind. More than a thought, a feeling. Looking to Pa playing his fiddle, Ma gently rocking in her chair while knitting, I felt awfully glad for now. Now could never be forgotten because it is now. It can never be a long time ago. Now I am an aging woman and no longer that little girl. But that same conclusion by young Laura Ingalls is still with me. I believe the true way to live is to enjoy every moment as it passes. And surely it is in this everyday, the everyday things around us that the beauty of life lies. For our lot, those of us who live in quiet places, we have the opportunity to become acquainted with ourselves, to think our own thoughts and live our own lives in a way that is not possible for those keeping up with the crowd. I believe this way of life gifted me with vivid memories. And it seems selfish not to share them with others, as they are not only my memories, but the lives of our family. But why now, you may wonder? With both my mother and my sister having passed, I feel compelled to honor and cherish the memories I am so fortunate to still have. Oh, and my daughter, Rose, she has insisted that I write these stories down. She is a writer in her own right. and that makes me respect her opinion, oh yes, all the more. This is not my first venture into writing either. My career as a writer began when my husband, Almanzo, or Manly, as I call him, and a much younger Rose and I were traveling to Mansfield, Missouri, to establish a farm and a new home there. Along the 650-mile journey, I kept a journal, which I later sent to the De Smet News. It became my first publication. In it, I described the caravan of covered wagons, one beyond another in long procession, looking small when compared to the vastness of the sky above us. Through cornfields, towns of German immigrants, through the city of Lincoln, Nebraska, on to Maryville, Kansas, with its electric streetcars and billows of dust from the roads, through the rail town of Fort Scott, where I recall the gladness of being greeted with a bower of shady trees, and on through Springfield, which was simply grand. We traveled until at last we arrived to our new home of Mansfield, Missouri. We called our farm Rocky Ridge. It was so different from the prairies of South Dakota, and Manly and I were glad for it. In South Dakota, we faced trials of crop failures and personal ailments that left us seeking something entirely new. Rocky Ridge was certainly that, with its rugged yet beautiful country. In time, we made a life there, raising hens and selling firewood at first. We lived in a small log house with a fireplace and no windows. It was hard work, and at times, short rations in the beginning. But gradually, we overcame the difficulties. Soon, the rocky surface was transformed into grassy meadows for cows, and we made a nice dairy and poultry farm for ourselves. By 1911, I was writing a regular column for the Missouri Ruralist entitled, As a Farm Woman Thinks, sharing my insights on farm life, my travels, opinions on national events, and home life. All the while, my dear daughter Rose was becoming quite well known for her magazine publications in the Saturday Evening Post, Harper's, Good Housekeeping, and many others. Oh, she has shared the rewards of her success with us. And while we are able to provide for ourselves, we accept Rose's generosity. Though I do have concerns that she may be too free with her earnings. I do appreciate her prodding me to write down the stories of my life. And so, here I am, recollecting. I do expect Rose will be a great help to me as I complete the manuscript. My memories, they take me back to our home in the big woods of Wisconsin. It was the first time I would fear bears. Oh, but I knew Pa and our dog Jack would keep us from harm. One morning, Pa had at last shot a bear, and Mary, liking to eat the drumstick of a chicken the best, she jumped up and down exclaiming, "I want the drumstick! I want the drumstick!" When Mary saw the great bear, she did not want the drumstick. Our next home was quite close to a rushing creek. Mary and I would make believe that we were in a ship, for we could hear the water in the creek running by, and how the water gurgled. In the summers, we sometimes would camp by the creek. We'd see the sun go down, hear the birds twitter their sleepy good nights, and we would dream to the sound of nature's lullaby. We did have our difficulties, as you might expect. There was a terrible time when a horde of grasshoppers utterly ruined the wheat crop. I remember Pa's eyes swollen and red from the exhaustion of trying to save anything at all. He had hauled straw and manure and put it in piles around and all through the field, and then he set it on fire, hoping that the smoke might keep the grasshoppers away. But they paid no attention to the smoke, and they ate through the stems of the tall wheat and the heads of grain. They ate every green thing, the garden, the grass, the leaves on the trees. Our chickens were quite happy as they ate grasshoppers until they could eat no more. The same went for the fish in the creek. Eventually, the grasshoppers had their fill as well, and all together lifted to the sky toward the west and were gone. Pa had to find work. He found it harvesting fields elsewhere to earn enough money for us to last the winter. Oh, we missed Pa while he was away, but the grass did grow back. Our darkest and saddest day was the loss of our infant brother, Freddie. He was only 9 months old. As a child, I felt sure the doctor would cure him as he had when Ma had been sick. But our little brother got worse instead of better. One awful day, he straightened out his little body and was gone. But of happy memories, I have many. Oh, Christmas was an especially wonderful time as our cousins and aunt and uncle would visit. It was so nice to have playmates. Oh, and Christmas dinner, new mittens, oh, and candy. We even attended a dance, which was like a dream for us girls. Back at home, Ma would read to us from the big paper-covered Bible with pictures. I was particularly fascinated with the picture of Adam among all the animals in the Garden of Eden. Mary and I would name each of them with delight. Pa and Ma had more trouble raising crops, and so we moved on to Iowa, where Ma and Pa helped to keep a hotel in Burr Oak. There was a nice big schoolhouse that Mary and I attended up on a hill in the sunshine. We liked our reading lessons very much and used to practice them aloud at home at night. Pa knew, but did not tell us later, that a crowd used to gather in the store beneath to hear us read. But money troubles had us back in our covered wagon and heading back to Walnut Grove, Minnesota. This would not be our last move, but later we would finally settle in De Smet, where Pa filed for a formal homestead. At last, Pa and Ma would have a permanent home. It did not come without some misfortune, though. Oh, this was when Mary's sight began to wane and she did become blind. I would help Mary see the world through my own eyes with my words, describing every detail especially of the beautiful sights. Perhaps this was some early practice in writing with vivid description. Carrie, too, would help, but Mary, being younger, she would often simply provide that childlike wonder that we were happy by, but growing out of ourselves, Mary and I. And one wonderful day, we met our new baby sister, Grace. This brought us such joy. But we could not help but worry that we might lose this babe as we lost Freddie. God saw to it that we did not. While Grace brought the cheer and reflection that all infants bring, I was becoming a young woman, and I began to think of the more serious things in life. It was in De Smet that I would meet Ingalls Wilder. I was 18 when we married. I had been teaching school since I was 16, and though I was happy to have served my pupils well, I looked forward to married life. I called him Manly, and he called me Bessie, from my middle name, Elizabeth. Yes, Bessie. Our first few years of marriage had their challenges. We suffered complications from a bout of diphtheria, which left Manly needing a cane to walk. Ever more difficult was the experience of once again losing an infant. Only now, it was my own baby boy. Fires, droughts, and ailments left us longing to go elsewhere for a fresh start. We tried Florida for a while, hoping its climate would be good for our health, but the weather and people were too foreign for us, and we actually longed for the plains again. We moved back to De Smet, and then later on to our home here in Mansfield, Missouri. It is very interesting to investigate your own life as a biographer or as a journalist might. I've consulted with family members, old neighbors, family friends, and historical societies to ensure that my memories are indeed accurate. Now, all that is left is to write them down and see if anyone should find them interesting. I do hope that you will, for in a way, this is a shared memory. My family's trials, their happiest joys, the lull of the creek waters, the simple moments of peace, a song, a fiddle playing, even the glistening of beads in the grass are not only my memories. They were mothers and fathers like Ma and Pa, sisters like my own, brothers like the one I was never able to know, and so many moments of long, long ago that lived yet do not survive within our collective memory. I shall endeavor to add to this collective memory with my own small contribution. But I hope that you too will savor the simple moments in life. The real things haven't changed. It is still best to be honest and truthful and make the most of what we have, to be happy with simple pleasures and have courage when things go wrong. I thank you for sharing your time with me today. Now, I must get to writing. You have prompted so many memories that I must get back to work. Do write me to let me know how you like my stories, when and if they do find publication. Farewell for now.
Welcome to Friday. Welcome to a special episode of our broadcast. We have had with us Laura Ingalls Wilder, but now we have Amy Beaucham, who was such a great interpreter of Laura and her views when she was looking back, writing her stories. I'll go ahead and say, I don't know, have you read the books? Had you read the books as a kid or?
You know, that was one series of books that I wasn't exposed to, but when the series on TV came out, they were in and out of my career in education. One or two stories would show up in my teaching material, and I've always had, just a respect for her as an author, and identified with that need to be, out in the woods and with nature.
Right.
That's something I'm going to do now, is read those books thoroughly.
Well, you should, and if you haven't, you definitely should. Here's the copy that I have. I can tell you that I began reading these when I was in 4th grade, and I absolutely fell in love with them, and I have continued. I don't know how many times I've read these. Yes, a hillbilly who grew up at the dead end of Hogback Road. Loved these books by about a young woman on the frontier. And yesterday we talked about the frontier. Hopefully you were able to tune in and sort of think about that. But Laura's stories provide the most remarkable insight into what it must have been like as not only a young person, but a young girl.
Yes.
And she's seen so many things. And even though she's writing in her later life, it just absolutely comes alive. And you begin to, through the series of the books, fall in love with these characters. And I know a lot of people, especially my mom, was so excited when the show did come on TV. Mm-hmm. And when the show comes on TV and they cast it, and, as any TV show, it has to be some different from the book. And it's named for Little House on the Prairie, even though the setting of the TV show is from the next book, on the banks of Plum Creek, but that's okay. And it's got a cast. It brought on Michael Landon from Bonanza. But so many great things came out of that, and I think that sort of reinvigorated people going to read the books. So there's so much to get into, and Lib, I don't know if we've got any questions yet that we could maybe address.
Sure. So we have one person who wants to know, how old was she when she wrote these books? And as we know, she was 65. But if you want to talk about her progression as a writer.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I know that she didn't start writing, the books, The Pioneer Woman and her books until, 63, 64, 65, with the encouragement of Rose. But prior to that, she had been the journalist for the newspaper and wrote column after column after column. She also wrote a poem called Ambition as a young girl, and it was published in the local newspaper. And she kept that poem all her life. And I think she reread it, as an inspiration for her to finally sit down and record her memories. But she was a good writer, a wonderful writer. She just wasn't a recognized writer, in a large-scale way of looking at things.
Right.
Her daughter was more that.
Yeah, and back in the day, as we say in the history business, Rose Wilder Lane was a much more popular author at the time. And of course, Laura and Almanzo were busy running a farm. They had, and if you've read the books, you know how hard it is to keep a farm going, and so they're working on that farm, and Laura simply doesn't have time to sit down and write until they get, until they get, retirement age. There is no retirement age on the frontier.
Alonzo said to her, "I'd rather have you than any other farmhand," because she knew how to saw, she could work all the machinery, she knew exactly how to work the garden, the fields. I mean, she got out there and really worked, and you're right, that preoccupied her time.
Right, and that's how she grew up. Again, when you read the books, you realize that there was no, there was some leisure time in the evenings, and they all had, sort of family time, but everybody did every job, and it was such an intense life. And growing up, I think it's when you see the pictures of her, as a very distinguished-looking older lady, you forget that she was a rough, tumble, barefoot kid on the frontier and doing all those things that you're talking about.
Right. Her father called her Flutter Budget.
Right, Flutter Budget.
Because she was here and there and everywhere.
Yeah, but she starts writing her series of books. I think Little House in the Big Woods was published in 1932. And from 32 on through 1943, I think, is when the series of books was written. And she started one the first 4 years, obviously the first 4 years that her and Almanzo were married. But it takes her from basically her first memories in Wisconsin all the way up to marriage. And so what we know about, it's not like it's a secret, but we have had to get from other sources what happened basically after she and Almanzo got married. The frontier life of a woman, I guess, is covered in the books from Caroline. But it's just, it's absolutely fascinating. And she's writing at a time when the frontier really does seem to have disappeared. Remember, if you saw yesterday, we were talking about Frederick Jackson Turner and the frontier theory about how when the frontier begins to not be there in the United States, in the very early part of the 1900s, America still seeks to really take that as part of the national character, and these certainly come at a time when it's something that people are looking for, and it certainly answers that thirst.
Can you talk about what of her life still remains that we can visit today?
Yes. So the question is, what of her life still remains today? There are actually a lot of sites that they have identified. They have identified the site of the Little House in the Big Woods. They have identified the Little House on the Prairie. It's about 15, 20 miles outside of Independence, Kansas. They have identified where the dugout house was in Plum Creek. The surveyor's house still exists. Their house that Ma and Pa settled in DeSmet still exists. I will go ahead and recommend a book. This is by William Anderson. Sort of get that a little bit closer. Laura Ingalls Wilder Country. And this book is great. It is filled with color photos. And the author has gone to all these different sites that you can visit. Of course, there's her and Almanzo's house in Mansfield, Missouri. So there's still a lot of places you can go. Now it's not within one town because they travel all over the country. So
but you could make a vacation of visiting all of the different places that she lived.
That's a dream vacation. Right?
Can you talk about what we're interested in the types of clothes that Laura and her family would have worn on the frontier?
That's a great question. So someone wants to know about the type of clothes they would have worn on the frontier. So William Garth, who did the illustrations for the series of books when it was published, actually talked to Laura about her experiences. He visited all these sites, and he looked at some of the clothes they had kept, and he looked at some of the historic clothes that were still available. And it's as you would imagine. It's very workaday clothes. they have, Pa has a nice coat, and the book in several places makes the point that they have their Sunday clothes, their nice clothes, their shoes. They'll have shoes to wear to church, but that's the only place they wear the shoes. They're the girls anyway, the kids. The girls are going to wear dresses. They're going to be homespun. The odds are, based on what's talked about in the books and just knowing the general practice, all their clothes are going to be made at home. There are not going to be any store-bought clothes in the Ingalls house.
Right. In my research, I read that when she boarded a train one time, she and her sisters, the mother had made she and her sisters look-alike dresses, and how prim and proper she felt in that dress, because it was only special occasions that they really wore their fine clothes.
Right. And so, that's what they would go to the stores to get the bolts of cloth, the raw material, the fabric, and then they would do that sewing at home. So it's going to be sort of dependent upon the patterns that Ma knows and is familiar with, and then later on, when they're turning into young women, they are going to have these, we would call them today magazines, but they're fashion books. They would buy fashion books, and they would show these dresses and show how to make the relatively fancy dresses in the 1880s and 90s. And that's where, but they would still be making them.
How many books did she write total?
I'm going to count because it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Eight full books, one shorter book, and I think she began work on her autobiography,
which was released later in the future.
Right.
Pioneer woman, right?
Girl.
Yeah. A pioneer girl. That's right. Sorry, pioneer girl.
Yeah.
Yes.
And these are all like authors at the time. These all were handwritten down. She was.
Yes. Oh yes. She would buy these tablets. And just wrote, prolifically, just wrote, filled them all up. She bought like 50 of them when she started this project.
Right.
And she used them all, and front and back. Very conservative.
Because you don't waste things if you grew up on the frontier. That's right.
And then Rose would edit and type, transcribe it and type it up for sending it off to be published.
Oh, okay.
Can you talk to us about what would it be like to travel by wagon?
So the question is, what would it be like to travel by wagon? So, depends on how far you're going. And, the Ingalls are going hundreds of miles when let me back up. There's traveling by wagon, going to town, picking up supplies, and there's packing up everything you own, going across the country to live in a new place. So I'm assuming that that's what you mean when you say traveling by wagon. So if you're taking everything that you have, everything that you own, and everything that you're going to need for the journey, that wagon is going to be pretty full. So the wagon isn't something that everyone's necessarily going to ride in all the time. Pa may get out and walk along the wagon while the little girls rest or sleep. The girls are going to, be out and be able to run and get exercise, but not too far from the wagon.
I think the heat was a component during those journeys on a wagon.
Absolutely.
I read that it one day got up in the 120s on one of those journeys. And then the dust,
Right.
And the food was very simple, like boiled eggs and, crackers, things like that.
Right, and just like hoe cakes, the flour and water and a little bit of salt cooked over the fire.
I do remember reading that there was one moment where she described it must be in her books, that she was laying in the wagon and there was an opening in the cover and she could see the fire flickering. And it was a very good positive feeling. It was a cool night and she could feel the breeze coming through the wagon. So, it wasn't all bad. I mean,
No.
she has some fond memories of those journeys as well.
And that's a good point. You make it wasn't all bad. You have to think, what does she and her family have to compare this
I know, yeah, relatively.
This isn't good or bad. This is life. And when you're laying there and a cool breeze comes through, as Laura said, it's the very simple things that turn out to be the most important.
Yes, it's all relative.
Did she ever receive awards during her lifetime for her books?
I think the question is, did she receive awards during her lifetime for her books? I believe she did.
Well, I'm not clear on that. I do know that there was some debate about whether to give her, is it Newbery Award?
Yes.
I did read about the debate. I don't know what the conclusion was. I'd like to know, but it sounded like maybe it was a no because of her mother's statements about Native Americans,
Right.
and that was a little bit of a problem with some of the evaluators for the award. But I would like to clarify, to know, did she ever receive that?
Awards. I know she received a lot of recognition
Yes.
getting on shows. So she passed away in 1957. And as her books got to be published, again, the last one was published in 43. So, she has a good 10 or 12 years to get that recognition, and people do begin to recognize these books for the glorious things that they are. And, to your point of some of the controversy, there has been some controversy recently about her books because of the depiction of Native Americans, of Indians. And, I think she's a product of her time. I know a lot of people say you shouldn't use that because it's just an excuse, but I think it's an entirely legitimate perspective because she went through these things, and when I read the books then and when I read the books now, I don't get the sense that she's trying to make some sort of political statement. She's trying to relay what a little girl felt like in the middle of a prairie.
There you go.
So, and there are different opinions, and they're all equally valid, but that's mine. They are very honest, and that in and of itself, I think, makes them worthy of more thought.
Oh, absolutely. The honesty, the descriptions of just how life was then brings so much value to her writings.
And like, they're so real because I remember reading, obviously she and her sister love each other dearly. Sisters love each other dearly, she and Mary. But even in the books, they're picking and sniping at each other. Laura talks about how jealous she was of Mary's hair, and she was never good enough. It's like having two little brothers. Wow, I get that. Except I may have been more sympathetic to Mary's perspective than Laura's most of the time. But that's neither here nor there.
It said in the monologue that I did, and also I read more about this, how her helping Mary see the world because Mary was blind, that surely contributed to her being able to have such descriptive language, because she had descriptive language even in her column she wrote,
right.
As a farm woman column. But because she had to vividly describe to Mary what was there in their environment, that just fueled her her ability to do that.
Absolutely.
So I think that's really significant.
Now, do we know if she traveled outside of the United States? Can you talk about her travel?
Yeah, so the question is, did she travel outside the United States? To the best of my knowledge, she did not. She is a all American girl and woman. She traveled through a lot of the United States. It's interesting. Most of her travel is out west. I think you mentioned that they went to Florida for a year.
Didn't like it.
Went back to the Prairie. Went back to Missouri. So she, during her lifetime, did a lot of traveling in ways that we can't even imagine now. Some of it by rail, a lot of it by wagon, by horse, by carriage, things like that. But she did not go outside the United States, even the continental United States.
And I know that she traveled to San Francisco for a great exhibition with two of her women friends.
Yeah, so yes, in her later years, she traveled to San Francisco, and I'm sure that was that must have been a fantastic trip for her to go that far.
Right.
She has a collection of letters that describe her going to the Pacific Ocean.
She has a series of letters talking about that trip to the Pacific Ocean.
In something I read, she actually asked Manley when he showed her a house, one of the houses, and she was a little disappointed that it was at the beginning of their marriage, their first house. She said, well, can we at least someday go see the Pacific Ocean? So that's neat that she saw that, because I know she said that to him when she was so disappointed in the little house he was providing her.
Now, do we know how Mary lost her sight?
Yeah, so the question is, how did Mary lose her sight?
I had read scarlet fever, but I also read, and I think this was the more valid description, was meningitis.
Right, yeah, I think Laura attributes it to scarlet fever, but modern folks going back and looking at the symptoms and the things, it's meningitis.
Yes. It affected the optic nerve. Is what happened.
And that was when she was 14, I
Yes,
think.
yes.
In this book.
Now, do you have an opinion on what Laura's favorite book of hers may have been?
Oh, so the question is, what was Laura's favorite book that she wrote? Wow.
Yeah, I don't know that was stated by her.
Yeah.
I don't think it was. You know,
What is your favorite book?
my favorite book, I can't pick just one. You know, I think I'm just going to stare at it in silence, folks. I don't know,
Yeah.
because they're all so good. I think what I can say is I think I like the ones when she's younger rather than when she gets older, and I can't even really tell you why. But the ones where they're in Wisconsin and on the prairie and things like that before they settle in the Dakota Territory, those just appeal to me more. Maybe it's because they were moving around more. I don't know. What about you?
Well, you know, I haven't read each book, but I did read that as she wrote the books, her perspective of the world was conveyed as she got older and more mature. She related her world in a more mature, sophisticated, way. So I can see where the beginning books of her childhood perhaps were a little more lively and almost like fairy tale like,
Yeah.
But I thought it was interesting though how she deliberately tried to write as if she were that age in each of the books.
And it works. It really does work.
And you can appreciate it. Yeah.
Can we talk about, what was the question? 1 second, sorry. Oh, what do you think Laura's advice would be to children? What do you think she would give to today's children?
So the question is, what do we think Laura's advice would be to children?
Well, she was such a lover of nature and being in the moment, being present. I think she practiced mindfulness long before that was labeled mindfulness. How she would she loved the moments of just sitting by the creek and hearing the creek and feeling the breeze and, the little simple things. And particularly right now, being sort of homebound, children can so appreciate those little things now that life has slowed down. So I think she would say, appreciate the little things, get in touch with Mother Nature, just let your soul feel what the flower feels. She was very in tune with, she loved flowers. And flowers just brightened her heart. You talked about the dugout. When they went to the dugout home, it was covered with flowers.
Right.
And she loved it. I mean, even though it was a dugout.
Right, it was the best house
she
ever lived in.
loved it, yeah. But and I think it, just slowing down and appreciating all this world, all the beauty in the world, and the quiet moments, that put down the video game and every once in a while, and just stop and take it all in.
And just coupled with that, I think she was always she had such a positive outlook on the world, and so taking and enjoying those moments, there, as you said in your monologue, there were a lot of sad moments in that she expresses in her life. There was famine, there was disease, there was loss, there was all kind. I mean, not just loss of people, but loss of homes, loss of money. They didn't know what was going to happen, but there is never an ounce of whine in these books.
No.
I mean, they're just sort of,
Yeah.
well, let's keep going. Like you mentioned, I'm so glad that you talked about the locust that came, and they're devouring their entire year's crop. And there's Ma out there, and she says, well, at least we won't have to feed the chickens.
They loved it.
That's a silver lining
Right.
finder, if ever there was one.
Exactly, yeah. She was definitely the kind of person that she was sort of solution focused, not problem focused.
Yeah.
She accepted her conditions, but she had hope too.
Right. So always apply yourself and always stop to smell those flowers, I think.
Yeah, there you go. Good way to sum it up.
Can you talk about the relationship between her and Almanzo and what that was like, and how was it described in Farmer Boy?
Yes. So the question is, how was her relationship with Almanzo, with Manly, and how did that develop? And what about Farmer Boy? So it was. I remember when I first read these, it was a little discombobulating because the first two books are about Laura, and then there's a break that goes into a book about Almanzo's early childhood, and they are. I was very struck by the differences. Pa is rough and tumble, doesn't have a lot of possessions, always on the move, going here and there, frontiersman. Almanzo's dad, very established New York farmer. I mean, they have a spread. They have several big barns. They have herds of cattle. They have acres and acres of fields and crops and things. So I think that that perspective, looking at Almanzo's youth, I think he came from a little bit higher socioeconomic status than Laura did. But he was still instilled, he didn't stay in New York to take part in that life. He headed out west too. And they met, out in the Dakota Territory. And I think the books make it really interesting because she's not attracted to him at first. She's attracted to his horses and how beautiful those horses are, because she also loves horses. And she sees this beautiful team of horses going down the street, and then there's some guy behind him driving the wagon. But when she starts looking for the horses, she starts noticing him. And
He was 9 years older,
yes,
by the way.
yeah, 9 years older.
Which was common.
Right.
Yeah.
But and then Pa starts to work with him during the long winter to try to feed his family, and it's after that Almanzo becomes interested in Laura. It sort of starts with that Almanzo-Pa relationship, and then Almanzo gets more interested in Laura, and then comes in and helps her out in some of her very uncomfortable situations when she's a teacher. And the books don't go into any detail that she ever, for lack of a better word, had another boyfriend. It seems like they more or less were a couple and were the couple, and that's the way it was.
They seem to have a very healthy marriage.
Very, very healthy.
So let's see, we don't have any other questions so far. Is there anything that you would like to relay about what you love about Miss Ingalls, and perhaps we'll end there?
Yeah.
Well, I think I can sort of identify with her being 64,
Right.
and thinking of, what do I need to accomplish now? I'm retired, and she had basically retired from writing the columns. And something else that I wanted to say too is that in their homes they would actually have writing rooms. Yeah, and and Rose, had built her this rock house that she thought was ideal, but it didn't have a writing room. But it was in that rock house that these books were written. She sat at a table and looked out a beautiful, window with beautiful scenery. But I thought it was interesting that Rose didn't think of that, But that didn't stop her. She wrote anyway. But in that stage of her life, she had Rose previously saying, "Mommy, you need to write all this down, all these stories you have." And but I think Rose sort of had backed off of that and built her mom and dad a home just to sort of just relax and live in, and just take life easy. But she got the gumption to go ahead with what Rose wanted her to do. And she sat at that table, she bought those legal pads and began writing and just wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. And it was nonstop. And that's just inspiring to me. But I can see where, that feeling of, I don't want to just sit around. I want to do something. I want to accomplish something. And I think that just swelled up in her, and she got the drive to do it. And by golly, she did it at the age of 63, 64, 65. And that's an inspiration to me.
Right.
To
accomplish much still.
We actually do have some more questions.
Oh, okay.
We're looking at the YouTube feed.
Oh, okay.
Okay, sorry, YouTubers. So, were there any major discrepancies between the show and the books?
Oh, so the question is, were there discrepancies between the show and the book? Yes.
Yeah.
Right, there were a lot. Because the show was having to make, weekly episodes for several seasons, so they began to borrow they began to develop. So the setting of the show was Walnut Grove, and Laura and Mary grew up there, and their nemesis is, of course, Nellie Olson and the Olson family. That entire thing with Walnut Grove and Nellie is only in one book. It's only in On the Banks of Plum Creek. But like I said, and they moved 3 or 4 different places after Plum Creek. But the TV show left them in Walnut Grove.
Yeah.
And they pick some parts of the books for the television show, especially for the first couple of seasons. But then the writers decide, oh, well, we've got great stories to tell too. So then it really starts to depart from the books, and it totally takes on a life of its own, to the point that the characters, I would say the character of Laura and Pa and Ma is pretty faithful to the way Laura describes them in the book. But as far as the narrative, the actual storyline goes, and the plots and things like that, it's left far behind.
Yeah, many characters and events were added.
Yeah. Still love the show, but I love the books more.
Yes.
Can you talk about the family's bedtime rituals with Pa playing the fiddle?
Oh, okay. So the bedtime rituals, and she does this in every book several times, and this is one of the great things about it, because she talks about, after supper, after Ma had, and the girls have helped Ma fix supper, I should, point out. And the day's work is done, and that's it, and they will wash up the dishes, and then they will sit by the fire, and maybe Ma will sew, the girls might play or braid their hair, they might sew too, and Pa's going to take down his fiddle, and that fiddle, like I said, it's almost its own central character in each book is Pa's fiddle, because Pa would play that fiddle, and Laura always talks about how soothing it was, and she puts the lyrics to a lot of the songs in the books, and it's just something that creates this recurring theme of contentment and safety and family.
Yes.
And throughout the books, she goes into that, which tells me that those night times with her family out on the howling prairie, safe in that cabin with Pa playing the fiddle, and she always falls asleep to Pa playing the fiddle. I'm about to tear up just thinking about it right now. It's just absolutely beautiful, and it's so soothing.
Yes.
All right, we'll conclude.
Okay, well, no, that's great. Thank you all for joining us for this special episode of Laura Ingalls Wilder. We wish we had more time, because I could just go into more and more detail about these things. Thank you, Amy, for joining us today.
I just think it's wonderful that you have your own books here. That's just remarkable.
Well,
how special.
These are the ones, so full disclosure, Mom, you're watching, these are not the ones that are yours.
Okay.
You still have yours. I got my own set so that I haven't stolen them.
Yes.
Although they look the exact same.
Well, I may take them with me now.
Oh, no. But y'all, if you haven't read the books, I strongly recommend each and every one of you to pick them up. They're super easy reads. I mean, they really are. And because she was writing for a younger audience. But adults love them too. So give it some research. Watch the show. It's still good. But that's it for the Northeast Georgia History Center for this week. We have another great lineup coming up next week. So if you can help us out, help us keep these going, please feel free to go to our website, click on that donate button. But if you can't do that, just continue to tune in, continue to tell your friends and family. And until next week, we hope you have a great weekend reading the books. Stay safe and take care.
Bye.